Hello everyone, good evening. I am Maharaj from BCBUZZ. Once again, I welcome you all to this Cyber Guard 2026 session 8. We are conducting this session at least 3 times in a week. This session is supposed to happen last Wednesday, and due to some logistical challenges, we are conducting this session uh, today instead of yesterday, Friday, which was originally scheduled. So once again, I welcome you all to this webinar. Let's dive in. So today's session is about the penetration testing and vulnerability assessment, where the boundary lies, and this is the session 7 of the CyberGuard 2026 edition. If you are following up with us in this YouTube channel, you'll be able to see the past 7 sessions the YouTube channel as well. And also, we are regularly updating these sessions one by one in our LMS platform as well. So whenever we schedule a session, you'll be getting a notification. At the end of the session, we'll be able to show how you can register for um, this 3 months of course in our LMS, and also follow the upcoming sessions as well. Today, 28th of Feb 2026 is another special day, not just because I'm delivering one more session after a long time, but because something entirely different. And this special day comes after another 14 years in 2040. Any guesses? Okay, here it is. Today, all the planets in our solar system will align in the sky, and this event won't occur again until 2040. Just another special day. Great. Let's continue. So legal, ethical, and technical disclaimer. So this webinar and the associated cybersecurity remote internship program, the CyberCard 2026, and all related information, materials, etc., are strictly intended for educational, offensive, and defensive security and authorized testing purposes only. And if you want to know more about this disclaimer and the restrictions and the boundaries and so on, we request you to go and refer this session 2, Cybersecurity Remote Internship 2026 Introduction Session, that is available in the YouTube under a CyberGuard 2026 playlist in BCBUZZ Technologies official channel. In that, you'll be able to see a few more details related to authorization and scope of testing, ethical hacking and responsible conduct, compliance with Indian laws, global legal and regulatory compliance. What is the meaning of real world exploitation? How one should have individual responsibility and accountability, and there is the zero tolerance policy as part of this program. This is not specific to cybersecurity industry, and the career and professional contact notice, which is available in the YouTube video and the CyberGuard 2026 playlist under BCBUZZ Technologies official YouTube channel. And this is the actual session that I was talking about, all this important things related to this disclaimer stuff. Okay, moving on. Today marks the 8th session of this program, and these are the past sessions. We started with the program charter online launch, that is session number 1, and then Cybersecurity Report Internship 2026. That's what I mentioned like a minute ago. And then Introduction to Cybersecurity Freshers Perspective, Network Fundamentals, Network Security Appliances, Pentesting Phases Standards, and the Cryptographic Fundamentals. That happened on Monday, last Monday. And in the same week, we are conducting session number 8, which is today, that vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, where the boundary lies. So this is our official LinkedIn. You'll be able to follow updates later to this sessions as well as job opportunities and other updates. And this is about BCBUZZ Technology Certificate Recognition, DUNS number, ISO, Startup India, and so on. And as a company, what we do, we have two core activities. One is into tech, another one is into cybersecurity services, especially offensive security for now. And these details are available in the past session that has been delivered on by session number 2. And this is the core service list in terms of offensive security, penetration testing, and vulnerability assessment. We engage with clients across the globe for web app, Pentest, mobile app, cloud, social engineering, red team services, and we do have SOC coming up in around quarter 3 2026 tentatively. And this is my weblog infw.com. Uh, More about what BCBUZZ Technologies does, what are the platforms, what is our engagement in terms of academy initiatives and all these educational activities and industry activities, the SaaS platform, cybersecurity services, AI, part of AI, the role of AI in cybersecurity, all this information is regularly updated in my weblog. Of course, the weblog is going through a minor revision, so please refer when you need any information related to this. So let's start. What's the difference between the VA and the PT? Actually, this is not the topic of the session. We believe the audience already have comprehensive understanding of what is a vulnerability assessment, what is a penetration testing, and what's the difference between both. Because this is expected that it has been covered in session number 6, a little bit at least. Okay, what is the result of a pen test? Okay, the result of a pen test, of course, we provide actionable insights to the vendor, to the client, to the management team for a company. It includes even the CISO. But when we share a report, what exactly the CISO sees, the Chief Information Security Officer, all that he sees is this pen test report is having scan results, CV numbers, CVS score, and remediation step, how to replicate that inside the environment, what is the risk score, and so on. A lot of information will be there in the Pentest report. If, for a comparison, a 12-page Pentest report can even be extended to even 80 pages, and it would be over exhaustive for a CISO to read and understand. So that's where the clarity comes in. What to mention, how much to mention, what should be in a vulnerability assessment report, what should be in a penetration testing report. Where does this vulnerability assessment stops, and when exactly the penetration testing starts, and so on. That is this. That is this. The session is about. That's all the session is about. Before we get into the details of vulnerability assessment and penetration testing and the boundaries, let's talk about little bit about the types of security assessments. We'll start with enterprise risk assessment, the biggest one and the major one. So what exactly is an enterprise risk assessment? This is an organization-wide view of digital assets, servers, data centers, infrastructure, devices, everything, and the cyber physical risks, exposure towards AI, and the business impact, and so on. For example, when we say exposure towards AI, you may have you may have heard about this recent attack that this the cloud AI. I'm not going to detail about that. Has been used against Mexican government data. More than 150 GB of data has been extracted, and this has been in progress for almost a month. That is something called the and that comes under the AI exposure. And when enterprise risk assessment is used, when we need board level visibility, returns of investment, justification for cybersecurity spending, enterprise risk prioritization, and so on. Okay, we are covering about different types of security assessment, and now we are at 2, the compliance and gap assessment. What exactly it is? Evaluate controls against ISO 27001, SOC 2, NSTCSF, PSADSS, and so on. These are cybersecurity and relevant frameworks and regulations across the globe. So it includes DPDP as well from India. When we do this type of assessment, when we are preparing for audits, when we are preparing for certifications, when there are regulatory reviews, and when there is a customer due diligence and so on, that is when we do this compliance and gap assessment. Third, vulnerability assessment. This is what the core topic of today. What exactly that is? Automated scanning and validation of known CVEs. Please highlight and mark this word known CVEs alone. For example, what it means, vulnerability assessment won't or can't be expected to detect zero-day vulnerabilities. Example, okay, misconfigurations and export services. When we do this vulnerability assessment, periodically, some do every month, some do once in 6 months, some may be doing once in a year, and so on. Our continuous hygiene, that is like a continuous vulnerability assessment and a plan for regular vulnerability assessment every quarter or every year, and so on. So next one is a penetration testing. If you see very closely, penetration testing, we start with the word called a human-led exploitation. When you see vulnerability assessment, we have mentioned it is an automated scanning and evaluation of known SCVs. So the major difference here, VA can mostly be automated by using tools, but penetration testing as of today requires a lot of human intervention. Of course, there are tools to handle a percentage of penetration testing, and beyond that, it is always a human intelligence required to be there to exploit web applications, vulnerabilities, APIs, networks, and so on. Why we do that? To validate the real world impact of something that is there. What if there is a server and there are some legacy systems running over it and nobody is using it and not even connected to the public internet? There is no point in highlighting that as a vulnerability or telling that it is going to have a real world impact because this is not public facing at all. So when we are using penetration testing, of course, again, periodically, or when there are major deployments, major releases, and major updates, for example, application updates, mobile app updates, and so on, when there are some patches released and there are changes done in the apps, changes done in the network, if there are additional API endpoints, and so on, that's the time when companies do penetration testing. So this is the core topic of today. What is the boundary between VA and the PT? So we are discussing about different types of security assessment, and again we have another 3 to 4 types of assessment. After penetration testing, the next one is the red team exercise. It's a bigger it's like the biggest elephant compared to the pen test, which is like kind of a cat or a mouse. It's goal driven and it is an adversary simulation exercise across people, process, networks, clouds, infrastructure, endpoints, and so on. So when we do this red team exercise on a major objective to test detection response and SOC maturity level, this is one example when it is actually used under realistic attack scenarios. What if some real cyber attacks happen? What will go wrong? What will work? What won't work? What would be the downtime, what would be the risk for the business, all these things will be part of a pen test. Sorry, all these things will be part of a red team exercise, not pen test. Next kind of security assessment is the cloud security assessment, where we review this identity access management, zero trust posture, content security, logging, and so on. When we do this, when we are operating either hybrid or multi-cloud environment, or when scaling cloud workloads rapidly. The next one is AppSec, Application Security Review. What it is exactly? Secure software development lifecycle validation, API security testing, code review, and so on. Supply chain risk analysis. Of course, WAS 2025 has one specific vulnerability in the top 10 related to supply chain. We have highlighted cloud code security here recently because this has been the news 5 days ago. What cloud code security is capable of. For example, there were some GitHub repositories existing for decades and being reviewed and audited regularly, but cloud code security was able to identify few major and hidden vulnerabilities in those GitHub repositories. So all this open source code and open source GitHub repos, all this can be subjected to the cloud code security assessment and it will be able to identify those vulnerabilities. This comes under AppSec, application security. And when we do a AppSec review, AppSec security assessment, before any major app launches or when handling regulated or sensitive data. Example. The next few things are architecture security review, third party assessment one, that is where in the slide. What exactly that is? Threat modeling, zero trust design, validation, AI system risk review, resilience analysis. When exactly do we use this type of assessment? When we are designing new platforms, for example, when let's say an OTT platform migrating from microservices to monolithic services. Let's say a e-commerce platform migrating from WordPress WooCommerce to natively built React and the latest JavaScript framework along with React Native app development and so on. So that is where this architecture review comes into picture. When modernizing the legacy systems means systems that are existing for a long time, maybe for 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it's still live but not updated because it is mission critical and there we cannot afford to spend the budget, we cannot afford to spend time to upgrade it and so on. Those are called legacy systems. That is the time when we do architecture security review. And the last few types of security assessment, phishing and human risk assessment, for example, you can use an open source platform called GoPhish, like that. So what exactly that is? Controlled phishing simulations and social engineering testing for workforce risk management. For example, um, company will give a press release that all these employees will be having vacation or Amazon coupons or vouchers in this year end. And then after the press release, 2-3 days later, company may engage with the security company to send a test email to all the company email accounts, which is not the original Amazon voucher link or something like that. They will create a platform or a portal where they can sign up using their corporate credentials or single sign-on and then claim the voucher. But actually, what it does, it is not an original Amazon voucher issue portal. It's just trying to know, trying to understand this like cybersecurity awareness of the employees there. That is a kind of a phishing um, exercise there. So any person who logs into the portal, if they are using the corporate credentials to log into that, an external portal, which is against their IT policy, which they may have forgotten by the time, or which they don't have awareness of that this is a third party portal and how we can share personal credential that is shared by the corporate. So this is kind of a phishing and human risk assessment. Last couple of things. Incident response readiness, of course, there will be tabletop exercises, ransomware simulations, and so on. When we actually do it, most probably, in most cases, annual exercise, or after some organizational changes, or after an incident happens, to validate the improvements. The last one is the third-party supply chain risk management. Nowadays, software development includes a lot of components. Some are proprietary, some are open source, and even today, you may have read about the news that some of startups or some companies who are using Superbase will be able to won't be able to continue using it because of the government notifications and so on. It's an example that is also part of a supply chain risk assessment. The news here is about Superbase for Indian geography. Those who are developing apps for Indian uh, geography for Indian citizens using Superbase example. Okay, so now we have just quickly reviewed about these types of security assessments. Let's dive deep into today's topic, that is vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, and where the boundary stops, where the boundary lies. We have created a web page to for the listeners and for the participants of this webinar. The web page is available in this link, in100level.com/VAPT. It's live. You may be able to you will be able to go and check it even now because that's where we are going to go to and go through the rest of this webinar. Let's go. I believe my screen is visible. Okay, and yeah, this is our LinkedIn. This is our Cyber Experts website. This is our SOC website. This is the Shigas website. And this is the Syra platform which we will be talking about by the end of the session. This is my weblog, inham.com. And this is the website that we were just mentioning for this particular webinar. Okay, this is our YouTube channel. You'll be able to go to YouTube channel, go to playlist, click CyberGuard. You'll be able to see the past sessions. And of course, until session number 7 is updated. And today marks the 8th session. And this is our core website. One more thing before we get into the topic, those who want to register for this entire program, for the upcoming programs, you will be able to go to learn.bz.io and click courses, and you'll be having the first course called CyberGuard CMS Penetration Testing Global Program. If you click this, you'll be able to enroll for free. I'm just going to close this one, our website. Yes, let's start. Hopefully you are able to go to this page, vulnerability assessment presentation classification guide. So what we have done here for the benefit of this webinar, we have created a few content related to vulnerability assessment presentation testing for some topics, for example, for web, for API, for network, and so on. And we have even listed out a few things there. So this is what we are going to cover in the next 10 to 20 minutes of the session. Okay. So you'll be able to see the standards it has been aligned with, for example, ISO 27 NIST, WASP, and payments card industry, and so on. And jurisdictions, of course, for India, these are all Indian-based regulations. One is RBI, one is Security Exchange Board of India. This is for insurance regulatory, and then another one is the DPDP Act. Certain is the compliance authority, the body that manages the entire Indian geography related incidents related to cybersecurity and governance policies and mandates and so on. It all comes from certain. And who's the audience of this page? Of course, security teams, compliance, legal. So we have covered few things for every single different types of audience. So we do have a legend here. Okay, the green ones are VA access only, and the red ones are penetration testing, exploit and simulate. Of course, when someone says like you can do a pen test and so on, actually we are not creating rows of data unless it is specified. Pen test is always a simulation and simulating exercise. You are going to simulate whether this cyber attack or this attack is possible in terms of hacker's point of view. You are not going to even complete the attack. You are not even, I mean, of course, as part of pen test, we should be able to exploit it. We should be able to complete the post exploitation steps and so on. Of course, there are things like that, but the the word here is it's a simulation of activities. It's a simulation of an attack. It's a simulation of data deletion, whether you are able to delete the transfer. So yellow marks the VA boundary, that is a vulnerability assessment boundary, and the purple marks where exactly the penetration boundary starts. Of course, for pen test, you definitely need to have few authorizations, including written authorization from the authorized person who should authorize you to the pen test. And another most important thing is rules of engagement. Rules of engagement defines what is going to happen, what you are going to do as a part of pen test, how you are going to do it, what is not allowed to do it, and what are the exclusions. For example, you may have a website that may have like a dozen subdomains, and the client says please exclude finance subdomain and for example payment subdomain, something like that, finance and legal, for example. When they say excluded, we should not at all, we should not try to do direct listing of these two subdomains, or uh, try to peep into or look into what is part of the subdomain. It's complete. Even client says it's completely out of scope, out of engagement. Of course, we should not even turn our heads towards it. How are we going to know where this is going to come? This is part of this rules of engagement document. Of course, the red marks the legal warning. We will be able to cover a little bit as part of the session, and the rest of the content is available for the public. The listeners, you can refer it later. Okay, we have discussed about what is a vulnerability assessment and what's a pen test and the differences and so on. Of course, we believe everyone is aware of this, because today's topic is not about what is a VR, what is a PT. Today's topic is all about where the VA boundary stops and where the penetration testing boundary starts. And this is the explanation, this is a definition for VA, and of course, what are those normally explicitly excluded from a VA scope. Active exploitation of any if you identify vulnerability, you are not supposed to exploit it. This comes under pen test. Delivery of attack payloads, for example, SQL injection. Okay, that will be in that's to confirm remote code execution. So that kind of activities won't be part of won't be part of a VA. It's part of a pen test activity. Privilege escalation, lateral movement, and so on. That is part of a pen test, not a VA. Data exfiltration, for example, for the proof of concept, what if you are able to exfiltrate some part of data and show us a proof of concept? No, it is not a VA activity, it is a PT activity. Authentication, control bypass to gain access and so on. Of course, you may think it is possible, you may be excited to do it, but you are doing a VA. You are not supposed to do unless client authorizes you a PT and it is part of the signed ROE document. This is These are the things. I mean, this is not the complete list. These are like the high-level comprehensive list. These activities are explicitly excluded from a vulnerability assessment scope. Where, I mean, when we say pen test, we may have pen test standards, phases in different phases in pen test standards and so on. But what is the framework for VA? So we don't have a VA only specific framework, but there are some framework that has defined a few things related to a VA. So ISO 27001, 27005 2022 edition defines VA as a component of a risk identifiers, and NASC SP 800155 section 4. Of course, these are documents available in PDF format. You can download directly from the internet, and it says VA activities as a target identification and analysis only. If you are going beyond analysis, for example, like exploitation or escalation or lateral movement and so on, it is not a VA activity at all. So certain empanelment criteria requires a VA to be conducted prior to PT in phase engagements. Of course, that is a standard. Everyone follows it. We are sure that most of you are aware of this as well. Now, PT, what is the penetration testing? So penetration testing, of course, is a legally authorized adversarial simulation only. It's the word. Look at the word simulation, in which a qualified test. Qualification is like you learned last night and you want to try a PT today for a client. Of course, I won't say that it fits into the qualified test criteria, because uh, half intelligent pen tester never knows what kind of damages they might bring if they are not aware of what they are doing. And one more thing, even the best pen tester, if they are overconfident, even if they miss even a small minor vulnerability, it is still an incomplete pen test and it cannot be claimed as a qualified pen test activity at all. So this is a master definition for the penetration testing. And what is part of it, like whatever we have told excluded as a VA, it's part of pen test activity. So one more thing we just want to highlight, rules of engagement is definitely should be there, mandately exchanged between both the parties, preferably by email mostly, um, not like a phone call, not like a WhatsApp approval message, not like that, because that is what going to save you from legal boundaries in the later point of time. So this is the legal warning in Indian geography for a pen test, and this is the legal warning for global, especially in US. This comes under this act. Even a normal scan requires a consent from the owner of the asset. That is there. And next thing, when we say about ROE, mandate for a pen test and not for a VA, what should be part of a ROE document, rules of engagement document? So mandately, it should cover these things. For example, I'm going to read a few, I'm going to explain few. So it is the only instrument that converts otherwise legal exploitation activity to lawful content. If someone says you are legally allowed to do the pen test, and if you want to claim that you are legally allowed, only the ROA document is going to support your stand. So it is a written authorization, of course, from the asset owner. For example, an employee joins an organization yesterday and today he gives authorization to a third party to do a pen test. Of course, he is not authorized to do at all. Someone who is legally authorized in that company, maybe from an IT head or a CIO or from the board, should be the person who is authorizing a third party company or even internal team or employees for a penetration test. So written authorization should be there, and explicit scope definition. For example, this is part of the pen test. They have to specify the scope and explicit out of scope. What is not part of a pen test, they should explicitly specify it, and what is permitted and what is not permitted. For example, what if there is a login screen and you would like to do a brute force attack against billion parameters of a word list? Okay, if your rules of engagement is not allowing that to do, of course, you are not permitted to do at all. And prohibited techniques, for example, DDoS attack. Okay, if they are specific, DDoS is not permitted. Of course, we should not do DDoS at all. But there are activities. Some may be having a business critical application where they would deploy environment in staging or user acceptance, not in production, and they will expect the third party pen test company to try a DDoS attack against that asset and see whether a DDoS attack is positive or negative. So, of course, that is allowed as part of pen test only if the client says it is allowed in that environment, and that should be explicitly mentioned in the rules of engagement document. Testing windows, of course, dates, times, and time zones. For example, some mission critical applications, they will allow pen test from example 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. in the morning. And the thing is, even if the business resumes by 7 a.m. or 9 a.m. in the morning, if something goes wrong, that's the reason from 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. They will take the time to fix things or recover things, or even if there's something goes off, they'll be able to restore something from the backup. That is a testing window. For example, some business critical applications, there will be maintenance activities in the weekends, so they will tell you are allowed to do pen test activities only from Monday to Friday, and you are not supposed to do pen test activities on weekends, especially Saturday and Sunday, because they may be having maintenance activities. The pen test point of contacts in the client side is not working, not available in office and so on. So emergency stop and about procedure escalation contacts. Of course, if you identify a very severe vulnerability or if something happened in between you are part of a PT activity, whom you should reach, and when there is an escalation contact, who you should be reaching at any point of time. These are all the minimum requirement, that minimum topics that must be in a ROE document. So this is not for a VA, this is for a PT, pen test activity. Okay, this is available. You may be able to read it completely in that webpage, inr.com/VAPT. So regulatory and compliance obligations for VA and PT. Okay, we have mentioned some regulatory and compliance framework for every single regulatory mandates from Indian geography as well as the global regulatory frameworks. Now, we will go to the core topic, the boundary. Okay, what is a VA boundary and where does exactly PT starts? Where VA stops and where PT starts. Now, let's start with the first domain. So we have few domains like web and then API and then for network and so on. Let's start with a few web applications. So when it comes to web applications, most of the activity will be against the web. That is either HTTP. Most probably it won't be HTTP because we haven't seen or any application that is exposed to internet with just HTTP without HTTPS for even Pentesting activity. So what are the things explicitly permitted as part of a VA? So automated data scan. Okay, you can use tools like WhatsApp, Bob's professional, but only in scan mode and so on. The proprietary tools, Akunetics and so on. Nikta, of course, you may be able to find the commands and the packages in Kali Linux. That is permitted in VA. Manual crawling and application mapping, HTTP header analysis. These are all part of some tool-based scan. Okay, if you run OpenVAS, if you run Zap, if you run Nessus scanner, if you run Bubble scan, and if you run few packages in Nmap and so on, you'll be able to get most of the information from what is permitted as part of VA. But what are the things that is excluded from a web application vulnerability assessment? You craft a SQL injection payload and then you are submitting in the field to confirm whether you have access to the DB. That is not a VA activity at all. And another thing, you are trying to deliver a cross-site scripting payload that has a possibility to execute in the browser sessions. No, like this, there are few activities. This is explicitly always excluded from a web application vulnerability assessment. To know little bit in depth about this, technical about this, these are the documents you can go and see. For example, OWASP Chapter 2021 was Application Security Verification Standard, Testing Guide version 4.2, NIST SP 8005. This is a PDF you can download. PCD, of course, only for fintech and so on, they will require this PCDSS version 4 and so on. So now this is where the boundary of VA stops. And this is where the boundary of validation testing starts for a web application. So what we do as a part of a pentest activity for a web application, of course, if the rules of engagement document allows you, you'll be able to do SQL injection and exploitation to retrieve DB content and cross-site scripting exploitation, CSRF, authentication bypass, IDARS, SSRF, all these things you are allowed to do as a part of a VAPT activity only if your rules of engagement documents allows you to do that. For example, if the rules of engagement document says that please do not do anything related to business logic, vulnerable business logic assessment or exploitation of business logic vulnerabilities. I'm saying again, exploitation of business logic vulnerability. If they are telling explicitly to exclude it, of course we are not supposed to do it. So legal warning, of course, a PT against a protection system without explicit rules of engagement is unethical and illegal activity, and there are laws and mandates across the globe where there will be penalties, imprisonment, or both. This is something that everyone should be aware of because VA is not that lighter workload in compared to the PT. So VA boundary for web applications. So this is a table where we have mentioned what are the activities that can be done against a web application and whether that comes under VA activity or a PT activity. For example, Observing SQLi error message from a scanner probe. Okay, it's a gray box pen test. Okay, passive probing, it may trigger DB error. Okay, we have inserted the notes there. What does it mean? Okay, for example, you are passing this parameter in a login in a credential field or a login screen. Okay, this is something that you need to read and understand it so that you know what is part of a VA and what is part of a PT. For example, if the payload causes a detectable data change, for example, you are changing your year of birth from 1999 to 2010, if you are able to do this, this is a PT activity. Again, what is part of a PT boundary penetration testing in web applications? Because we have mentioned few topics here and we have classified which is a PT, which is a V, and so on. Again, for web applications, okay, these are all the trigger points where actually penetration testing begins. And authorization, these are the authorization required for a web application PT. For example, let's say the website lies beyond a content delivery network provider and there is a web application firewall, and bypassing attempt to bypass a WAF is part of the scope. Of course, you have to have a special authorization and a notification notified to the content provider that we are going to have an activity like this and so on. It has to be notified to both the CDN provider as well as the pen testing entity, the company, as part of RV. Okay, now let's go to the next domain. We have just covered for web. We'll go to domain 2, that is API. So what are the different types of API terminologies we come across with the existing web applications across the globe? We have REST API, GraphQL, SOAP, and gRPC. Okay, API vulnerability assessment. What are the permitted activities? Of course, these are all the permitted activities. For example, cost policy misconduct you can detect as part of a VA. But if you want to go to the next step and so on, it should not be in a VA activity. It should be in a Pentest activity. For example, BOLA, broken object level authorization, pattern identification by inspecting API patterns. It is a VA activity because you are just assessing it. You are just inspecting it. It is a VA activity. But if you want to go to next level, next step beyond this, of course, it is not a VA. It's where the PT boundary starts. We have even mentioned what is part of, what are the exclusions, what is not part of a VA for a API, examples here, and some frameworks like was API Security Top 10 2023, ASVS, again, it's a different, that is 115 for web application, 20 for API, and these are different sections or subsections for API under PCDSS standards. Okay, this is where the PT boundary starts for API. Okay, we mentioned a few of these already. For example, API key secret leakage exploitation. For example, you discovered some key and you are using that key to authenticate few service account. That's a PT activity example. Okay, so the legal warning, as usual, like we mentioned for the web as well, and VA boundary and PT boundary. For example, these are the activities and what is a part of a VA, what is a part of a PT, and the explanation towards it, and when exactly PT penetration testing entry triggers and requires authorizations for VA. For example, um, any API call volume exceeds normal operation threshold. For example, if it is like 150 hits per second, and of course you are going to try like 800 API calls within 3 seconds. It exceeds the volume, it exceeds all the thresholds, it could be it may be a potential DOS activity, denial of service. And these are the authorizations, these are the entry triggers, and these are the record authorizations for annotation testing for APIs. The next one after web application and APIs, we have mentioned in this page in this file for networks. External network vulnerability assessment. What is part of a VA? What are the exclusions? And if it is a pen test, what are the activities? Let's say if you are considering or even if you are planning any of these activities, please ensure that you are not crossing a VA boundary, because this never comes under a VA boundary. This is a PT activity. So similarly, we have mentioned the activities, and we have classified which is a VA activity, which is a PT activity, and the entry triggers and authorizes required. For example, any exploitation of identified CVEs in production network devices. Of course, you are connected to production network devices. You have identified a CVE. For example, one of a device may belong to one of the top 5, top 10 vendor. I don't want to mention name. For example, names can be Fortinet, Cisco, Checkpoint, example, and so on. And there is a CV existing already. If you are going to exploit it, of course, this is a PT activity and definitely needs proper authorization. That is an example here. And of course, let's say you're trying to establish a secure shell connection to network services for any remote management and so on, or are you trying to even access what is behind this IP address and so on. It definitely is a PT activity, not a VA. So ROE, of course, it has to specify the CA and a range, subnets, what is not part of scope, and if there are requirements related that you should be notifying your ISP or hosting provider. For example, some hostings, for example, they demand that the asset owner notifies them for any PT activity that is happening, because all of a sudden if they see some um, uh, tool scan or a network packet coming from a auditing entity, and this hosting provider is not aware of anything, and that is where their own firewall rules, their own policies will block the packets, drop the packets, and so on. And in such cases, even if there is a rules of engagement between the assessing entity, that is a pentest client, pentesting vendor, and the client who is actually consuming the pentest activity as a service, and there is this hosting provider sits in the middle, they should be notified as well by proper communication. For example, whitelisting an IP or telling the time when exactly these activities will be happening, and once that activity pentest activity is done, they should be notified that activity is over, and they no longer have to monitor or put a watch or against that particular IP that is coming. And next one is the internal. What we have seen so far is the external network penetration testing, and this is the bigger one in terms of network. Internal network infrastructure pen tests. Okay, what is part of VA? What is not part of a VA activity? Because anything you do as part of this is a pen test activity, definitely require proper rules of engagement, authorized rules of engagement document, and proper authorization as required. For example, if you have Active Directory as part of your Internet network infrastructure, and you do have group policy objects or access control lists, and if you are going to interact with that, like modifying a user account to a normal user account to a super admin user account example, if it is explicitly authorized as a pentest activity, then only you should be doing it as a part of a pentest activity, and definitely not any of these activities related to VA. So internet pen test, of course, what is part of a PT? These are all the activities and what are the legal boundaries and so on. So another thing, points. We have listed a few activities there, and we have even listed what is a VA, what is a PT in this, and there is one activity we have marked as gray. You'll be able to read that detailed description in the bottom. And these are the triggers of pentest and proper authorization is required. For example, like we said, privilege escalation attempt through exploitation. Of course, it demands authorization and of course a specific mentioning in the ROE document. Of course, this is a cloud. Cloud is another big topic because every cloud has a different expectation. Google has a different expectation. AWS, of course, have mentioned different expectations when they have to notified and what is considered as part of notification requirement, and it is entirely different compared to what Microsoft expects for Azure and so on. So this is for cloud, and we have mentioned that cloud as well. And yeah, this is for three major cloud platforms: Azure, AWS, and GCP. And we have mentioned few things related to other cloud providers like Oracle Cloud, IBM, any private cloud, for example, Zoho Cloud or OVH Cloud, and so on. This is a requirement. Hybrid cloud, we have mentioned. AML, of course, this is very unique topic, very different topic, and of course, for example, large language models application view. This is very new topic. Of course, most of the new age AI applications, agentic AI applications, RAG, GenAI, all these things comes under this AI and ML scope. And of course, there are some frameworks across the globe newly created for this. This is the boundary, this is the legal warning, and this are trigger points. Finally, we have IoT, OT, and embedded systems. And this is another one big topic which requires a lot of understanding because um, for for such assessments you may have to be physically present there. Some requires a safety engineer to be there. It's a different advanced topic altogether. And this is for the VA and PT for OT, IoT, and embedded systems. And the final one is additional thing like enterprise attack services, social engineering phishing. We just mentioned as part of the introduction session. Mobile apps, iOS and Android, and CACD pipeline, and DevSecOps, physical security testing, third-party supply chain risk. So, the end of this document, we have consolidated all this. What are the gray zone activities for all? And yeah, this is something that everyone should read if they are going to involve in any of this pentest. If you are going to do a VA, it's fine. You don't need a RO document, but still, it is mandatory that we are aware of what is the boundary of a VA, where it stops, and so on. So now coming back to the PowerPoint here, the presentation for today, we have covered in detail about the boundaries of a VA and PT, and we have created a page where the participants can go and refer it later. And of course, this page is not final. It's like only the high level updates, and it is expected to be revised at almost once in a month. Please take it as a reference only, not as a playbook. And of course, we spoke about this 3 months program. You can sign up for free. It is available online in our LMS platform, learn.biz.io. And who can enroll in this program? Of course, anyone across the globe from age 8 and above. For international students, if you are facing any issues, please reach us at support@biz.io. We will be able to help you. And of course, as part of this program, we have also created a group where we are providing some updates related to ISC to CC training. This is delivered by a third-party vendor, um, third-party training company that is in Bangalore. Of course, we are not authorized or a partner of ISC tool. Communication channels, we do have WhatsApp channel, we do have email. We will share the WhatsApp channel link in the next slide. Email, you can mail to support@biz.io, it is there. And We can leave a dedicated WhatsApp number if you have any questions or if you want to engage with us. And of course, this LMS platform is available as a mobile app in at Google Play Store named Cyber, and this is a WhatsApp channel. You can even scan this QR code. This recording will be available online YouTube. This recording will be available online in our LMS platform as well. And please take a minute to scan this QR code for your feedback. It might take less than 10 seconds. So we have only 3 to 4 questions there. And finally, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your presence today. We look forward to see you on another technical session going forward with the CMS presentation system that is from next week. And this is our website. This is our cybersecurity SaaS platform that is coming soon. And